persuaded me because she's a killjoy. She doesn't really have fun like I do. I was going to send him downstairs to go find my water. Meanwhile, while you were up here, I was going to explain to you that Caleb's really nitpicky about pronunciation. He's like, well, you didn't pronounce that word right today. And I was like, I'm just going to, on purpose, pronounce the other woman as Oprah, all of chapter 1. And all you would know, and the people listening later on would know, but Caleb would be back there just dying. His innards are toiling because he keeps saying Oprah. Okay, all that said, though, so tonight we're in the book of Ruth, and we're going to do the whole book, and it's a beautiful book. I thought about splitting in two because I easily could have, but I'll kind of keep my points shorter. But I ended up with 18 just like teaching points, great little reminders. And, you know, a lot of this, because it is the story of two single people finding each other and falling in love and getting married. And so there's actually a lot of great advice for single people in search of a spouse. But most of this advice applies to all of us. So it's not like it just applies to single people, married people, you know, pack up your stuff and go home. There's no point in being here tonight. The book of Ruth is actually one of the sacred Hebrew books. It's interesting, and I guess I didn't even realize this until one of my more recent trips to Israel, talking with one of the scribes there, Sofer, how the sacred books that were used at feast, they are read publicly, the Torah plus a few select others, they had to be on parchment and they had to follow all these procedures. But actually the Psalms and many other books, they could be more relaxed with how the Jewish scribes copy everything. But Ruth is read at the Feast of Shavuot, which is Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks. So this is publicly read with the Jews on the Feast of Weeks. And a lot of it has to do with because it takes place during that timeline. It's also sacred because it's the genealogy down to King David. So there's a few reasons why this book is special. But let's start off with verse 1. It says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land." Timelining Ruth can be difficult. And I ended up just quitting trying to find the exact perfect time because there's a couple different ways to skin that cat. What we know is this, though, is that if you do a timeline of the book of Judges, there's actually a lot of overlap. While one story is taking place further north, another story actually can be brewing on down in the south. So the book of Judges is not strictly chronological. There's actually overlap in some of the stories. And the last couple stories of the book actually timeline begin at the beginning of the book. But somewhere in the book of Judges, there was a famine. Now we know that the Midianites, they came in and created famine by coming in at harvest time and stealing all the grain. They'd wait for harvest. The plants would grow. The people would go out and bring them all in. And then the Midianites would show up and take it all and leave. We're going to find Boaz later sleeping with his harvest because this was the times they lived in. Like it was, they slept with the food because they wanted to be there to defend it if raiders came in. And so if you do your timelines, again, you might find there's some hard times to fit. Where exactly does Ruth fit? Because we know she's only a few generations before David. And we know the genealogy of Boaz coming down from Salmon, and I'll get more to that later, but that's the timeline. And there was a famine in the land. So was it a famine earlier on, later on, somewhere in the book of Judges? Is it mentioned in that book or not? But there was a famine during this time, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, this man is actually a landowner in the land of Bethlehem, which is the house of bread, Bethlehem. And he decides to go to Moab. Now, Psalm 60, verse 8, and Psalm 108, verse 9, God says, Moab is my washpot. God doesn't think too highly about Moab. But the problem in our first teaching point of the night is the grass is always greener syndrome. There's famine in the land, and maybe if we go to Moab, this will fix all of our problems. Like I said, this can be advice for single people. This can be advice for all people. But quite often, we want to be, well, we always want to be where God wants us, but quite often there is a temptation. Maybe things would be better if I moved over there. Maybe a new scenery is what, maybe I need to change things up. And you know what? If you were in the right place to begin with, then there's no need to move. Now, sometimes we're not in the right place, and God will do things to get us going where we need to go. But the second thing here in verse 1 now is it says there that they went to dwell in the country of Moab. I think the King James says sojourn, because that's the word in the Hebrew, gur. It means to sojourn, but specifically it's just dwelling for a time. It's a specific word, not for a permanent place of residence, but for a place that you're only planning on being there for a little while. And the reality is this, is that, when we say it's only temporary, I didn't delete some of my other thoughts there, but they aren't going to leave the house of bread for the washpot long term. They're only going to deviate from the Lord for a short season, as long as needs be. And that's another thing we find sometimes, is we're tempted, first off, to leave where we ought to be, to go somewhere different. But also there's this idea that disobedience is okay as long as it's just temporary. God, this is only a short-term thing. I'm only going to do this thing that's not your will for a little while, just enough to get me by. And it's never a wise way to go about things. And so we need to understand that there are no short-term solutions for the Lord, that, He's got us on the long-haul path. We should be looking at what God wants for us and just aiming for that and continuing to go for it. Now, the man, his name was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. So you'll find what was supposed to be just a short trip ends up being a longer trip of 10 years. Just for what it's worth, the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, their names mean sickly and pining or wasting away, which are silly names for kids, you'd think at first, but I think these guys were born during the famine. You got little babies, they're born during a famine, and quite often they named kids something that was actually associated with the kid. And obviously these kids were born under poor conditions, right? And I also think that they were probably pretty young when they headed over that way. So in verse 3, it says, Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, her and her two sons. And now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the women survived her two sons and her husband. So that's the story as it goes. It's pretty quick. They move over. During the few years they were there, let's say the boys were 5, 6 years old when they left, 7 years old, 8 years old. They move over there and, 10 years go by, and maybe they got married towards the end of the stay there, and she moves back. They would have been old teenagers, early 20s, somewhere in that range. They take these wives, but then they die. And so it says in verse 6 that she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. So there was bread again in the house of bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, her and her daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, Go, return to her mother's house, or go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, Surely we will return with you to your people. Now, Naomi was actually likely a very godly woman. We see some of her low points, but two reasons why we know she's godly. Because one, Ruth follows her, right? I mean, Ruth wouldn't have followed this woman if there wasn't something about her that drew her. And I believe Naomi represented her God. Again, we kind of see Naomi at the low points in her life. Her husband dies, her sons die. Call me bitter. It's going to come up here in a little bit. Well, I can see why she feels that way. But obviously there were some godly attributes because one, Ruth says that I want to make your God my God. Well, how does Ruth know? Probably because she learned it from Naomi. Number two, many women, if their mother-in-law was moving to another country, would have been happy. But no, here, we're willing to follow along. Okay, I got chuckles. Good. People are paying attention. But that's it. They're going to follow. In verse 9, just a key word that'll show up again later, that the Lord may grant that you may find rest. This word rest is a unique word, and it speaks more of a place of rest, i.e. a home. She was basically saying that you might find a husband and be able to settle down and have that rest of settling down. So what does she say to them? Verses 11 down to 13 or so. Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, and if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." So, firstly, Naomi gives Ruth and Orpah some very good advice, at least as far as practical worldly wisdom goes. Ruth and Orpah had a much better chance of remarrying in their own land than coming to Israel, where the Moabites were not highly looked upon, as Moabite widows. I mean, this is like lower than low on as far as the totem pole goes. She's saying, no, stay here. You have a much better chance of actually finding a husband. But point number 3 of the night is that God's ways are not our ways. And that's the reality of it, is that I have sometimes heard advice that I had to recognize that is very practical wisdom as far as the world sees it. But actually it contradicts the faith that we are called to walk by. And so sometimes we need to remember, you know what, this makes sense to everyone else, and my friends are saying it, and some of my family's saying it. But if the Word of God says differently, then you need to trust the Lord and realize that we don't do things the way the world does things. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts." God is just making the point that his ways may seem mysterious to us or confusing to us. We have to trust God has a plan. And I can't shortcut or circumvent that plan by doing it the world's way. Secondly, we see here from her where she's saying the hand of the Lord has gone out against me, right? God is out to get me. But that's not really the truth. But it feels that way sometimes. And maybe, again, as I said, some of the advice even being specific for single people trying to figure out life and God's plans. And sometimes it feels like, God, why is this going on? Why is this happening? That's one of many scenarios that we as people go through where we're wondering, God, why is life playing out this way? And so she says what seems to make sense to her. The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Man, God must be angry. But Romans 8:28 says, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined. And I just pause there because just stopping there in verse 29, it reminds us that God put us on a course, predestined us. We're on a path, and he always knew where that path would go. And it's funny because I can't help but think that Naomi and Elimelech leaving Bethlehem for Moab was as an act of disobedience. They're leaving the promised land to go flee to a foreign land. This is what Abraham kept on getting in trouble for doing, leaving the promised land, going down to Egypt every time things got hard. And going down to Egypt brought problems back, named Hagar. But God used Hagar in a way, and God used this trip to Moab to find Ruth. And so God will always work things out, even if we've disobeyed. And it's not that he's out to get you or that he's against you, but God is going to be continually nudging you back onto the right path, and he'll take your mistakes and he'll turn them into something good, as he does here. And so after Naomi says this, verse 14, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Now, maybe it doesn't jump out to you, but it does jump out to me how Orpah goes back not just to her people, but it says that she goes back to her gods. So it kind of makes you wonder the character of Orpah, because obviously we have very little information in verses 3 to 5 of what went on between the sons and these girls and what was the vetting process and all of that. But obviously it wasn't hard for her to leave the Lord and go back to her gods. And so this is a bit of the singles advice specifically is be patient and hold out for the real deal. I don't want to count how many stories I know, and it's almost always young Christian women who marry a man, and he's a Christian right up until they get married. And then eventually it kind of just comes out that he really never was a Christian, but he knew she wouldn't date him if he wasn't a Christian. And the guy plays the role for a while. And you know what? If we're being desperate and we're not really doing things God's way in God's timing, we might fall prey to that. But no, we should be patient. Hold out for the real deal. Because if they're the real deal, they're not going to turn around and just give up. If you find someone who's really committed to the Lord, I like in Keith Green's, I pledge my life to heaven, or I pledge my head to heaven. He says, as I told you the day that we wed, I'd rather be caught dead than to love you more than the one who saved my soul. Now, that's a wedding vow. I'm going to love you, but I'm always going to love him more. That's a good vow. That's a keeper. Someone who really thinks and believes that. John 6, it just reminds me of that. After the bread of life discourse, it says, from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. There was a lot of people who followed Jesus as long as the miracles were coming, as long as the preaching was good, and as long as they weren't expected to do anything that they didn't like. But as soon as his preaching got a little heavy and it started demanding something of them, they left. I don't think that they were really believers. I don't think they were really born-again people, because born-again people, we stumble, we backslide, we drift. But these guys walk away, and so Jesus looks at the 12. Do you also want to go away? And I've always loved this verse where Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Peter knows there's nowhere else we can go. And that's the true mindset of a born-again Christian. They know there's nowhere else we could ever go. I could never run away that far because I know there's no place to go. And so be patient. Find yourself getting yoked up to someone like that who puts God first. And we see that in Ruth. Now, this verses 16 and 17 are these beautiful verses that I actually have very little commentary on, but they speak for themselves. Some people have called them some of the most beautiful in all of the Bible. Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord, and she uses the covenant name there, Yahweh, do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Something had stuck with Ruth. She caught something that was authentic, and it was already having an impact on her, and she knew that she would not leave her mother-in-law nor her mother-in-law's God, whom at this point she had committed her life to. And so when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. And I love the way that's worded, because I think it means she stopped trying to persuade her to leave, but it kind of just makes it sound like it was a very long and quiet walk back to Israel. Oh, if you're not going to do my way, we're just going to not talk. Now the two of them, verse 19, went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened when they came to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Right? And she says, do not call me Naomi, but call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. So Naomi means pleasant. You're happy. But she says, call me Mara, because God has made me bitter. Now, you might be familiar with the springs of Mara when they come across the Red Sea. They part the waters, right? They get there, and there's those bitter waters. They call it the bitter waters of Mara. It means bitter. And I mean, she's lost a lot. She lost a husband. She lost 2 sons. And so she's just saying, don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me Mara because I'm bitter. And so our next point of application, don't become bitter because no good will ever come from it. There's a reality there that bitterness can seep in. And to some extent, we have to allow it to. Oswald Chambers once said that moods don't go away by praying. They go away by grabbing them by the scruff of the neck, and you just deal with them. You know, Lord, I just got this bitter mood I want you to take away. He's like, no, you need to rebuke that thing. Say, shut up, bitterness. I mean, you have to really get on it, because when I'm in a bad mood, it's something you just kind of have to deal with. It's not always easy. But firstly, she's lost a lot of people. And so something as Christians we don't need to become bitter with is we don't need to be ignorant concerning those who've fallen asleep, our deceased loved ones, lest we sorrow as others who have no hope. 1 Thessalonians 4:13, right? That we know that our loved ones can go on ahead to heaven. And so that's something where we don't need to be bitter because we have this hope that other people in the world do not have. But secondly, just a great reminder as far as just bitterness in general is Hebrews 12:15. We should be looking carefully lest any root, and the idea there is just the thing that starts it, the little beginnings of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Once you start noticing that you've got some bitterness, deal with it quick. I don't know about you guys, but it's weed time, right? I mean, if you're dealing with a garden right now and the first of the goat heads have just started coming up, and I go at those things fast and hard because I'll tell you what, a little baby goat head is really easy to pick. The bigger goat heads are much harder, and they have all the goat heads on them. But if you get them before the seeds come, you're eliminating the supply and you're getting at them. It's easy to pick baby weeds. But if you allow those things to grow, in Ellensburg, didn't have goat heads. My enemy up there was the mallow. Those are the ones with those huge, long tap roots. They got those huge roots, like it's like a carrot you're pulling out of the ground when you pull these stinking things up. And my hands would get raw because it's just so hard to pull these things. But if you get them when they're little babies, it's easy. So that's one thing from verse 20 there, is that she became bitter. And she's just human just like we are. But we need to be watching for that and stop that. Secondly, and again, wherever your condition is, whatever you're going through in your life right now, don't become bitter, and don't become bitter at the Lord. Trust the Lord. In verse 21, she says, I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Almighty has afflicted me? All right, this one was kind of like a 1-2 on the points, but the old hindsight is 20/20, and really with that is count your blessings. Remember back in verse 1, the grass was greener. She had a husband. She had 2 sons. But, the food situation looked better in Moab. So let's leave here because we don't have anything, and we need to go to Moab, and then we'll have what we want. Well, she gets to Moab, and as she comes back to Israel, she realizes, I'm coming back with less than I left with. I thought I was empty back here, but now I really know what emptiness is. And so I say hindsight is 20/20. Your definition of empty can change very quickly once God takes you through a different round of something. And on the other side, again, the counting your blessings. She thought she had nothing when she left, but she wasn't counting what she had, her husband, her 2 sons. And it's the reality that many parents, especially those crazy enough to have lots of kids, your kids can be stressful, and they can make you want to pull your hair out. I just beat my hair to the punch. That way I couldn't do it anymore. But the reality is that they're a headache, and they're stressful, and they're frustrating. They make you angry. They make you this, that, and the other. But many parents going through that trial should have a conversation with the parents who don't have kids in the home anymore, who've lost kids. I mean, this is a whole, and it's like, you know what? Be thankful. Be thankful you're changing diapers. What would I give to change one of my kids' diapers again? Because now they're old, grown up, and out of the house, married, not dead even necessarily, but they're gone now. Those things that were a headache, I would love to go back and do. And so that's the reality of it, is that counting our blessings. Job said it well at the end of chapter 1. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job just took it all in, recognizing, all that I have is from God, and God can take it, God can give more, and I'm going to be content where I am. Paul says in Philippians 4 that I have learned to be content in every condition, whether abased or abounding or empty or full. I can face, essentially, all things through Christ who strengthens me. That word I can do is actually to have strength or have power in all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whatever situation is thrown my way, I can take it. And so if you are, again, single or not single, but you're going through a hard situation, well, just count your blessings, because there's a lot more blessings there than you might assume, because hindsight is 20/20. You might look back and say, those were some great times of my life that I was wishing were different. Verse 22, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess with her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So if you're a note taker and you want to put it in your Bible, Passover time is the beginning of the barley harvest. In fact, if the barley isn't ready to harvest, that's when they add one of those leap months. If you're familiar with that, they have a leap month in the Hebrew calendar. And one of the things they use to determine, do we need to add a leap month, is if Passover is not falling around the time of the barley harvest. They'll add an extra month. So it'll be later. So figure early April, though. That's a great ballpark time for when this took place. Now, chapter 2 takes us ahead. So we're at chapter 2, and we get this guy Boaz now showing up on scene. So there was a relative of Naomi's husband. So he's related to her husband, right? A man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. There's a cool word here that I want to point out to you guys, where it says great wealth, Chayil, there we go. It is translated in our Bibles as wealth, as valor, as strength, as integrity, and as virtue. And so in chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz will call Ruth a virtuous woman. It's the exact same word. So it's interesting that it doesn't, I assume Boaz has some wealth because he has all these employees and stuff, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that's what this word was implying, that he was a man of virtue, a man of valor. It's a very broad term, but it was a very positive thing to say about someone. And so here is Boaz, right? This man of great virtue. Now, I guess I'll look at this because we're going to see this again and again, and I don't know where would be the best place to put it in here, but advice again for the singles. That's a big theme tonight, but again, it applies to all of us. Develop character first. We're going to find that these two hit it off and get married pretty quick. And why were they able to do that successfully? Well, because they were both mature believers. When you have mature believers with great character and they find each other, you can move forward very quickly. This is why I always tell teenagers, you guys need to date a long time. I always tell young girls, right? It's like, well, it's one thing if you find an older guy and he's already been working a job, this, that, and the other, but it's like, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable. We'll see when the date gets here. But it's one of those things where it's like, you want to marry the boy and he's 17. It's like, what can he do? Plays video games. Like, what is this? Is he going to provide for your family? Is he going to, this guy needs to establish himself as being the kind of man who can lead a home. And in today's culture, unless they're homeschooled and probably have a family business, it's very hard for a teenage boy to really show himself actually being marriage material. Now, a man who's actually been working a job, paying his own bills, folding his own laundry, hey, now, that's just practical stuff. But these people were godly people from the get-go. And so that's something here we're going to find is that they're both already being called a man, and in chapter 3, verse 11, a woman of virtue, of chayil. They've got this quality to them where they're quality people. I couldn't find the author. Actually, I found numerous people it was attributed to, so I don't know who the original person was, but it says, we all make choices, but our choices end up making us. You in your life are going to make lots of small choices, but those choices will end up defining who you are as a person, your character. Another quote, I never know who to attribute my quotes to, but taking it all the way back, before the choices are the thoughts. Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. And it really is. It all just starts off with small choices. Ruth and Boaz are going to be people who are people of character, and it all starts with just these small choices. Making the right choices in the little things on a regular basis builds us up as stronger people. And so he's this great man of wealth, a man of Hagil. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean the heads of grain after him whose sight I may find favor. And she said, go, my daughter. So one verse, and I got some cross references at the bottom for you note takers. Leviticus 23:22. In the law, it says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field when you reap, nor shall you gather any gleaning from your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. That was Leviticus 23:22. There's also Leviticus 19:9 and 10, Deuteronomy 24:19. These are all slightly different too. Rules about harvesting. If you forgot a sheep out in the field, you can't go back and get it, because just leave it there. It's going to bless someone else. God had all these welfare programs built in, and they were wonderful because it provided for the poor, but it made the poor go out and work for it. It was actually a nice system that God had set up. And so this was her right to go and glean. And it even says specifically, right, in that verse, for the poor and the stranger. So she's not an Israelite, but that's okay. This law applied to non-Israelites. So she is doing nothing more than her right. And so verse 3, then she left and went and gleaned. Did I miss a thing? I did miss a thing. No, I didn't. Here we go. Then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Isn't that funny? She just so happened to end up at Boaz's place. What a coinkadink. Number 9, it is easier to steer a moving ship. I see Christians stuck in the paralysis of analysis, waiting to figure out what they need to do, rather than going and making those little choices that are just obviously the right thing to do. I mean, should I go to church today? Do you need to pray about that? These are these things where just start getting going, because it's easier to steer a moving ship. Ironically, I think I quoted this in the message this morning, but this was what I was preparing for, and it was just on my mind, because again, I've been in a boat, I've done sailing, and it's like, if the wind is not blowing your ship forward, I've been where the boat's just drifting towards something, and it's like, well, I have no wind, so I have no way to move forward, and I can steer this thing for days. This boat is not going to change course, because I have nothing to push me forward. But if you're moving, you can start guiding and directing that. Some of you are old enough, you've driven cars with manual steering. And you know what that's like in the parking lot, where you got to turn into Safeway to get my spot. You get big forearms. You're real buff. The young people with all the power options on cars, they just don't know. But that's the idea, again, is if you don't have power steering, you kind of need to be moving to easily turn your steering wheel. Once you're driving, you could probably never know the difference on the freeway. But in a parking lot where you're stopped, you feel the turning of that steering wheel. Genesis 24:27, Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to find a bride for Isaac. And he prays at the end of finding her. Blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his mercy and his truth toward my master. As for me, being on the way, the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren. Go back to Canaan and find him a wife. Or sorry, go back to the land, go back to where you're from out of Canaan. So he goes back and he's just praying, Lord, bring someone to me, right? So he's praying, Lord, find this woman. I don't know where to find her. And so if you back up to verse 15, after he's praying that, it says, and it happened, just like you're in Ruth. Before he had finished speaking, that Rebekah came out with her pitcher on her shoulder. You see, this servant didn't know exactly where to go, but he went. He had a general idea of the direction he should be headed, and he just prayed to the Lord, bring me that wife for my master's son. And boom, there she is. Ruth, she doesn't know what she's supposed to be doing, but they need to eat, so I'm going to go find food. That's practical, good idea. I'm going to get out and get a job, or, well, this is what I can do. I can go glean. And so she goes to glean. And then the Lord is guiding her steps. And it just so happens she comes to this field of a guy named Boaz. Verse 4, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. What an awesome workplace. Who's going to do that this week, right? Just walk in the door. Come on, dude, at the high school, just go, the Lord be with you, and to see what people do. Who knows? Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they've read Ruth. I don't know. But this is a bold man here, right? He is bold with his faith. I love that. And remember now, too, just put this where it belongs. And in this day, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's the defining verse repeated more than once of the book of Judges, the time, place when this happened. So here's this godly man in an ungodly season of Israel's history. And maybe they were on one of the little mini revivals because God brought bread back. So maybe it was a high point. But still. Now Boaz, verse 5, said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, who is this young woman? Or whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, it is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she's rested a little in the house. As we looked at Boaz, just to start, right? The Lord be with you. Number 10 on my list of advice, wear your faith on your sleeve. You know what? Especially if you're single, because you know what? If you want to attract Christian women or Christian men, and when they see this person is a Jesus freak, then all of a sudden you attract someone. It's like, wow, this is the kind of people I was looking for. But again, these were people who were bold. Boaz is out there saying, hey, now with her, it might not seem so bold, but let me remind you, she had rights under the law of Moses to glean there. But she didn't come demanding her rights. Ruth was a humble woman. She comes requesting with a humble spirit, may I please glean here? And again, she had a right. She almost didn't even have to ask. She could have just appealed to the law. But she's a humble woman living out her faith in practical ways. And so it says, Boaz, in verse 8, said to Ruth, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. We're going to see more of this in the next few verses, but just pausing here for a second. Boaz was a genuinely kind and caring person. I honestly think, and I'll make my case a little bit more as we get to the end of the book here, but I don't think at this point Boaz actually had any idea in his mind that Ruth was a potential bride for him. I think that she was too young, and other reasons that I don't think that was in his mind. But I think he was a genuinely good man and a genuinely kind man. And so again, practical advice for all of us, just be genuine and be genuinely kind. Once again, it is these acts of kindness, acts of goodness, acts of generosity that people see. They display our character and the kind of people we are. People are always watching. You are the fifth gospel. People may never read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but your coworkers, friends, and family will see your life and the way you live. I thought you were a Christian. Well, yeah, be genuine with people. Hey, when you mess up, just be genuine about it and admit it, and try and be kind and giving. And so Boaz is just a generous person. So she, verse 10, fell on her face. She's a very humble person, bowed down to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? Well, It's one of those things that many of you might know because you've pieced together some of those fun genealogies here and elsewhere. I'll tell you one good reason why Boaz would take notice of her and not treat her like less because she's a foreigner. Because Boaz was the son of Salmon. Salmon was actually at one point listed as the head of the tribe of Judah. So he is a person of authority in a high up position. And Salmon married a woman by the name of Rahab, who was a prostitute from the city of Jericho, whom turned to the Lord when Joshua sent his spies in. And so Boaz is half Canaanite, and his mom was a Canaanite prostitute. He knows how to show kindness to people who might be considered outcasts or different, And so here's the kind of person that God had prepared for Ruth, someone who would have no judgment towards her. And so verse 11, Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth and have come to the people that you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Kind of a cool thing is later on, she will ask him, I think the old King James says, like, to put your skirt over me. It's the same word for wings, though, here, where she has come under the wings of the Lord for refuge. Later, she's going to ask to come under Boaz's wings. It's the same Hebrew phrasing right there. And then she said, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." And so again, it's just that being kind, being genuine. We see this all in Boaz here. We see Ruth, again, this whole time, she's so humble. I mean, she's just very gracious, very humble. It makes me think of 1 Peter 3 and 4. To the wives, to women, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging of hair, wearing of gold, putting on fine apparel, but rather let it be the inward person, the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. And this would be a good verse to go again later with one of our future points. But again, it's talking about Ruth had a real inward beauty to her. Now, verse 14, now, Boaz said to her at mealtime, "Come here and eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied and kept some back. She saved a snack for her mother-in-law. And again, it's the idea is that his hired workers had food provided for them. The people, the poor people who came to reap, they were on their own. They got to freely take of everything, but they were on their own. But he said, you can come here and sit with the hired workers and eat of the food that I provide for them. And so she even was able to take some as a snack for mom. And then she arose to glean, and Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Also let from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." And so they're just saying, every now and then just kind of toss a handful on the ground or something and just leave a sheaf back and just let her have it. And he's just being super generous. And let me say this again, as I've already said, I actually am of the mindset. I actually don't think Boaz is thinking that he's going to win himself over a bride. I do think he knows that she's a relative of Elimelech and that there is a family relation, and perhaps he is showing a little bit of extra favor, knowing, well, this is my cousin's son's, wife. And so, I'm going to take care of this woman because she's kind of part of the family. And so I think he is showing her extra favor. And as we get into it more and more, we'll see, he is the Redeemer. He is the kinsman redeemer. We'll talk about that more in chapter 3. But even knowing this ahead of time, that this whole time Boaz is a picture of Jesus, our kinsman redeemer. And so it says, she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out what she had gleaned, verse 17, and it was about an ephah of barley. And that's half a bushel, so a half of a laundry basket is probably one of the easy ways to get it. And then she took it up and went into the city to her mother-in-law, and she saw what she had gleaned. So she brought out and gave to her what she had kept back after she had been satisfied, i.e., this is what I gleaned, and here's the lunch that I saved for you. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you. See, mom realizes this was not by accident. Obviously, someone was being generous to you because you don't walk away with all this just on your own. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today was Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, this man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. I want to mention, because again, I have all the advice for single people and other practical bits of wisdom, but there's also just some great teaching points, just general, and that is, here is the Redeemer showing unmerited kindness and favor to people. And look what it does with Naomi. When she sees the kindness of the Redeemer, how the one who wanted to be called bitter, she's now praising the Lord. She's now worshiping God. Romans 2:4. It's part of an ongoing thought, right? So it comes in running. Do you despise the riches of his goodness, forbearance, long-suffering? These are all things that God does for us. And are you not knowing that it's the goodness of God that leads you to repentance? You know, you might convince an unbeliever that they need to become a Christian because of the fear of hell. That's legitimate. But the fear of hell doesn't apply to a Christian. And I'm sure many of you know the reality that God can chastise me all he wants. But if he really wants to break me, it's when he blesses me in my disobedience. It's when he continually is good to me when I'm not so good to him. That's what really brings me to repentance. That's what really changes my heart, as I continue to see God's goodness poured out, even amidst my own unfaithfulness. And Paul writes to Timothy, or is it Titus? My brain is going blank. It's getting late. This is the third service of the day now, right? I knew this would have a wear on me. But even if we are faithless, he is still faithful. He cannot deny himself. That's the idea, is that God is always faithful even when we're not faithful. And so it's beautiful to see this picture of the Redeemer, the kinsman Redeemer, showing his goodness and how it's changing the hearts of people trickling down. Ruth, verse 21, the Moabitess said, he also said to me, you shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that the people do not meet you in any other field. So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. Number 12. I'm going to build into it, though, is that notice, does anyone not know where this book's going? They're going to get married. Okay, just don't leave. I don't want you to go now that you know how it ends. But she's going to propose to Boaz, and they've done nothing but working at the field together. As far as dating is concerned, group activities work just fine. And so you find here that she didn't have to date Boaz one-on-one. Boaz didn't have to move in to find out if they were made for each other. No, you can actually hang out in groups. This is what I always tell teenagers who aren't really old enough to effectively date. They hear that from me every youth service that we have. So, I mean, I'm a broken record with them. But for the adults who maybe don't hear that every broken record time, you know, I always just explain. I know that other men, most of you men here tonight, I know that typically you're just totally celibate men, right? Like, honestly, you'd probably never have sex if it wasn't for you had to have kids. The thought never crosses your mind. I wasn't that way. I actually fell in love with my wife, and I wanted to be intimate with my wife. And it felt very natural for me. And the reality is that's natural for everyone. But teenagers aren't in a place to get married. So to put yourself into a position where you're going to stir up those affections. This is like the book of Song of Solomon again and again and again. Don't stir up love, right? There's that warning about stirring up love before the time is right. They put themselves in a situation where they're going to become physically attractive and passionate, but they can't get married. You got 2 years until you're able to get married. Like, that would be forever. I was engaged in a few months, right? And a few months later after that, I was married. But the reality is, though, is that I tell teenagers, but you can just hang out with people And you can find out really quick who you want to marry and who you don't just by hanging out in group settings. You don't even have to date them to find this out. Ruth and Boaz just hung out in group settings, and they figured it out just fine. They didn't need a ton of one-on-one time. And the danger for any unmarried person, or married person for that matter, of one-on-one time is that often can open the door for bad decisions. I like this quote I heard from John MacArthur just recently. I will never fall into sexual sin with a woman whom I have never been alone with. And I think that's implying even talking with, like carrying on conversations via messenger, via text message. Do you think you're going to stumble in adultery if you purposefully don't put yourself one-on-one in those types of situations? No, you won't. And that's the reality of it. There's great protection and wisdom in that. And obviously, there's a time and place where it's two single people who are getting to know each other. They can text each other. I don't have any problem with that. But if you're a married person, you have no need to text other people of the opposite sex for long, ongoing things that could potentially go down a bad road. And so they did group stuff. They were able to get married after just all these group activities. That's just practical wisdom. Again, if it's not for you, it might be for your kids, or it might be for your kids' kids. But it's good wisdom to pass on right there. That's stuff to live and die on. Chapter 3, Naomi and her mother-in-law said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? This is the same word as rest back in chapter 1, verse 9. That word of finding security, finding rest, and it's the security and rest you find in a home. So again, it's this kind of a loaded word in the Hebrew. And so it could mean rest, it could mean security, and we see it translated both ways. She needs to find her a husband. Now, Boaz, whose young women were with you, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your best garment. Go down to the threshing floor and do not make yourself known unto the man until he is finished eating and drinking. Tip number 13. I just did it because it seemed practical. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes. If you're trying to find a spouse, this is good advice. It's not super spiritual, but it's really practical. And the Bible has all things that pertain to life and godliness. This falls in the life category. Right? There's the godliness category, which we mostly focus on. But I'm just saying it helps. You can usually tell when a young man has found a girl he's interested in because he starts washing and shaving and putting on deodorant. So it's a giveaway. And there's even more practical advice. I didn't make a bullet point for you guys, but the mother-in-law tells her, if you really want to get this guy, wait until he's done eating and drinking. You wait until he has a full stomach, and it'll be much easier to deal with. And so that's just great advice, women. If you had to give your husband bad news, after dinner. Verse 4, then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies. You shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. Now, this is kind of a cultural thing we're getting into here, but it makes perfect sense to the people there at that time, just a little weird for us. She said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. And so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all her mother-in-law instructed her. People say there's no miracles in the book of Ruth, but right there, the daughter did everything her mother-in-law instructed her to do. And that's a miracle. Okay, and after Boaz had eaten, I don't know why I do the mother-in-law jokes. I'm sorry, pray for me. After Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And so she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lied down. So again, I believe kind of that time when the Moabites were coming in during the days of Gideon, you see that there was a season during the Judges where raiders were a real deal, and the time they were most dangerous was harvest time, because all of this wealthy, back then, right, salt and grain, that was the commodities that were traded. And so everything was right in one place at one time. If you want to do a big bank heist, this was when you did it. You came in at harvest. So the owner, he's sleeping there probably with a sword. And it's kind of funny when you wake up with someone sleeping at your feet, right? You're like ready for battle, and here's this woman. And so at midnight, the man was startled. So he probably had been sleeping for a little while, and there she is down there. And he said, who are you? So she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing. So literally, the literal Hebrew says to spread the corner of your garment over your maidservant. But again, the corner of your garment is also the same word for wings. When we talk about being under the cover of God's wings, the protection of his wings, this is all symbolic in the Hebrew language, and it all just means under the protection of, under the authority of. You're under his guidance, his protection, his authority, his everything. And it's symbolic of marrying, that as a wife, you would come under his authority and under his protection. And so to spread, take me under the wing, for you are a close relative. And that's a key word here. Then he said, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. This is one of the giveaways. He calls her my daughter, which could just be endearing, but he even specifically mentions the fact that you are choosing me over younger men is kind of a dead giveaway. And the rabbi tradition was that he was much older, that he was like in his 70s. And so again, that he was a much older guy and she was much younger. And so again, that's why I don't think Boaz assumed that was going to go anywhere with their relationship. That at first he was just being generous out of the kindness of his heart. But now he's surprised. And now, my daughter, verse 11, do not fear. I will do all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. So that's the one we read back in chapter 2, verse 1 about Boaz. That he was a man of virtue. Well, she's a woman of virtue. And now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. I'm not going to read it to you for the sake of time tonight, but you should have this in your notes if it's not in your Bible. The Gael, it's the kinsman redeemer. And Deuteronomy 25, 5-10, if you flip there and we read it all, there were different things actually that the close relatives were responsible for. One of which was Genesis 38. We have a long story with this whole, where if a brother dies and they have no kids, their land was supposed to go to their kids. So in order for the land to keep going down that path, one of the man's brothers is supposed to come and take his brother's wife, his late brother's wife, conceive a child so that that child can carry on the inheritance that would have gone to his father. If someone kills your brother or your sister, and you're the close relative, you're the kinsman, it's your job to go avenge their death. That was the justice system back then. That if someone killed your brother, you were in charge to then go kill that person. They could flee to the cities of refuge, that's the whole thing. But there was actually a handful of responsibilities of these family members. But here specifically, and Jesus, the Pharisees or the Sadducees bring it up to Jesus about how what happens, if a brother dies with no kids, then the next brother takes him, then the next brother takes him, then the next brother. That's what he's talking about, is this situation. So Boaz is a kinsman. He is a close relative, a Goel. But there's someone closer than him. And so he tells her, stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative to you, good, let him. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. Here's a big piece of advice. And yes, it's for all of us, but it's also, again, for the singles, which is no cutting corners. Boaz wasn't going to cut corners. I bet you he could have gone and just taken her as his wife. Oops, I guess I didn't realize there was a closer person. No, Boaz wasn't going to do that. If he was going to marry her, it was going to be legit, and he was going to do it the right way. And there is a right way, and there are numerous wrong ways. As we were talking about choices and how choices define us, who we are as people, because they define our character, we need to remember that quite often there is one right choice, and there are a multitude of wrong choices. There's no such thing as being married in God's eyes. I've had people back, witnessing and whatnot, and they're like, well, we're not married, but I think we're married in God's eyes. Well, you have a marriage certificate? That's married in God's eyes, at least in our culture. If Moses required people to give certificates of divorce, I'm pretty sure certificates of marriage isn't a far stretch. But people have all these ways to cut corners. Well, it's not really sex. Come on. There's all these things we can do to try and redefine and twist around, but not Boaz. He was a man of character, and he was committed to finding, a woman of character, and maybe that's why he remained single so long. Why is a catch like Boaz single? Well, because in that day there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And maybe he held out because he wasn't just going to marry any old someone. He wasn't just going to get married because he was lonely. He would only get married if he could find a woman who was a truly godly woman. And so he's going to deal with this and do it right. So in verse 14, she laid at his feet until morning and arose before anyone could recognize her. And then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Okay? He's trying to protect her reputation because he didn't want anyone thinking any kind of fishy business had gone on, because he respects her and he wants to maintain just her purity and just her image that she has as being this godly, virtuous woman. And so the next couple points are godly men points. And one is this: a godly man will respect a woman's purity. Now, quite often, especially with the youth, what I find is I don't need to talk to the guys, because if I can just get the girls to understand who they are and what they deserve, then the boys have no chance. And that's the thing. If I can just teach the girls to shut the boys down, then the guys will either figure it out or they'll remain single. And that's the thing, though. So that's why when I give it a thing, a godly man, well, we'll let the women hear this more than the men almost. A real man that's worth your time will respect a woman's purity. Now, I want to add this because I think this is important. A godly man may still be tempted, and a godly man may still make bad choices, especially if he's allowed to. But that same godly man, even if he's made the bad choices, when the opportunity for repentance presents itself, he'll take it. When he's rebuked because he caved and made some bad decisions, he'll take that. If the woman then says, we crossed the line, we can never cross that line again, so we're going to have to take some major steps backwards on our relationship, a godly man will gladly do that. That's the difference. Godly men make mistakes, but godly men are also willing to make the right decisions so that they don't repeat the mistakes. And so next, we see he tells her, bring a shawl, in verse 15. That's on you, hold it. And when he held it, he measured 6, and notice ephahs is in italics, of barley, laid it on her, and then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, is that you, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her, and said, these 6 ephahs in italics of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law, for what it's worth. I know we always teach this again and again, but it's good to remember, when it's a single word or just 2 words in italics, it means it's not really there in the Hebrew. It's not really there in the Greek. A whole verse is a quote. In the New Testament, you'll see, a whole verse quoted in italics. That's different. It just says 6 in the Hebrew. It doesn't actually give us a unit of measure. I don't think it's ephahs. I don't know what the New King James people were thinking, but an ephah is 6 gallons. It's half a bushel or so. So she would have been carrying in a scarf that she was wearing about 2 laundry baskets full of barley. And I don't think she could carry that much. Nor did I think she was wearing a scarf. That would be a huge scarf. Anyway, it's a silly point, but remember before she worked all day and she got 1 ephah. It's probably handfuls. Just don't go home to your mother empty-handed. Here. And he gets 6 big scoops. There's probably no unit of measure for giant heaping handfuls. So they just said, he measured her out 6 and gave it, here, put this in your shawl, take it home. He doesn't want her to go home empty-handed. This is his new fiancée and all. And so when the mom sees it, verse 18, she says, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. I have that underlined, but I'm going to highlight that in my Bible. I'm doing it right now. I never feel bad to stop in the middle of a sermon to highlight something that just jumps out, but I love that verse. The man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. A godly man will do whatever it takes, point 16 of my 18 points. A godly man will do whatever it takes. If he has to take those back steps because he made some bad decisions, a godly man will do that willingly. If a godly man has to wait, a godly man will wait. If a godly man has to work, the godly man will work. A godly man will do whatever it takes to get the job done and get it done right and well. And so again, that's the kind of man that a godly woman deserves, is a man who will do whatever it takes. A man who will fight for her, a man who will sacrifice for her. And it's really easy to find lazy men these days. Those are in abundance. There's no shortage of men. just good ones. And what's funny is there's all these women complaining about the shortage of good men. There's all these men complaining about the shortage of good women. I don't know why they never have met each other, but they're all over. I find them all the time on both sides of the aisle. Have you guys met? Like, okay, but regardless. And so I love that line. Chapter 4 is actually a very fast chapter. It's going to move kind of quick here because Boaz gets up and he goes to the gate and sat down there. And many of us know the gate of the city is where business was done. Lot sat in the gate at Sodom. We find Absalom, when he wants to gain influence to try and overflow his dad, David, he goes and hangs out in the gate to make decisions for the people. So this is where business takes place and where the elders sat. And so Boaz, the guy, the relative, came by and he says, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And they said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Because remember, Boaz is related to this guy. "And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you." And he said, so the guy replies to Boaz, "I will redeem it." Verse 5, then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And the close relative said, "I cannot redeem for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, I'm going to tell you, this might be a carnal way of looking at this, but I cannot help but think it. This guy had a biblical mandate to redeem that field. And it was a shameful thing as we get into the taking off the sandal and spitting. That's all part of this procedure we're getting into here in a few verses. It was a shameful thing to actually not do it. And it meant he would have to take Ruth as his wife and obviously sleep with her to produce offspring. So when I say it might be kind of carnal, I was just thinking to myself, if Ruth was smoking hot, I don't think he would have turned this down. I'm just being honest, like smoking hot woman, well, he's already married. He said, well, it's a biblical mandate. He has to do it. And honestly, 9 out of 10 guys, and especially carnal people, I mean, I don't think he would turn this down. And the only reason I bring this up is because I would actually wager that Ruth was not this exceptionally beautiful woman and everything that drew you to her. It was not her outward beauty that drew Boaz. And it definitely wasn't Boaz's 70-plus beauty either. I'm just saying, like, these weren't two people falling in love because they thought the other one was smoking hot. They both saw something extremely attractive in the other, and it wasn't physical. That's just where I stand. To me, it just makes the most sense. That if she was just this smoking hot Moabitess bombshell, the guy probably would have picked her up. But he's like, oh, if she has to come with the deal, no, thank you. And so, number 17, remember, beauty is fading. And that's a really important thing to remember because things change over time. She looks, really cute with that little kitten tattooed on her back. But one day it turns into a tiger, and after that it turns into something else. It's just time. Turns the butterfly into a dragon. And I mean, people change. And the reality is that if physical was one of the primary things that drew you to a person, well, you're not going to have that leg to stand on someday if it's just purely carnal and physical. Now, do we want to be attracted to our spouses? Absolutely, right? But Proverbs 31:30, right? Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, goes away. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And that's something we find is that no matter how much we fight and try and struggle, typically beauty will go away over time. Some faster than others, some surprisingly slow, but it does go away with time. But also typically a truly godly, virtuous man or woman, those qualities grow over time. People with a superficial faith, they might be stagnant for many years, but believers who are really sold out for the Lord, their faith does. It grows and becomes beautiful and more deeper over time. And that's what we want to find. And that is what Boaz has found in Ruth, is a virtuous woman which is better than beautiful. And so verse 7 now explains, now this was the custom in former times in Israel. And I'll pause there. Scholars are kind of across the board, but I would say the majority, that the largest group of people on who actually wrote the book of Ruth, many people think Solomon wrote it. That Solomon actually wrote about his great-great-great-great-grandmother, and that this custom wasn't around by Solomon's time. So he's actually having to explain, this was kind of an old school thing. We don't really do it anymore, but it was done back then. The custom concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. Deuteronomy 25:9. So we already mentioned that this is where you find the whole Goel, the Redeemer thing. That is, brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal of his foot and spit in his face and say, so shall be done who will not build up his brother's house. This was if they rejected, is what happened. Here's the sandal and she spits in his face. So the sandal thing is going on here. We see it now. And it says, therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy yourself. So he took off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day. I bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. So again, he was a leader. He was at least in line to be a leader. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this woman. That's in Genesis 38, and that is a story, which I won't go back and retell, but it is where there was a kid, and he ends up having a wife, and he dies. They have no offspring. And then the next brother doesn't work out, and the next thing. And so eventually the woman, Tamar, dresses like a prostitute and lures in Judah, the dad, her father-in-law, and conceives a child. But the story revolves around a woman who had no inheritance and had to invoke this kinsman redeemer situation, and with an older man produced an offspring, but that kept the line alive, and it became the line to Christ. So that's what they're kind of saying, that may it be like Perez, who he was born out of due time and in through a situation that's similar. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And I'll throw out there, Boaz is a very popular name in Israel these days. Judah has a friend Boaz. We see him when we go over there. And may he be to you a restorer of life, verse 15, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him. Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her bosom, and became a nurse to him. And the idea was she cared for him. She didn't literally nurse him, right? And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. Get this. This just sounds like a mother-in-law move right here. You just gave birth. Your mother-in-law comes and takes the baby. And when they come back, her and her friends, they go, oh, and by the way, we named him while we were away. Here you go. Here's Obed. Oh, thanks. We were going to go with John, but Obed sounds fine. No, so they name him, they give him back. But it says, now Obed, he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And so it just kind of recaps the whole genealogy in verse 18. Now this is the genealogy of Perez, whom Tamar begot from Judah. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. So Salmon and Rahab, the harlot, begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. And so my final point of just things we can glean, many for single people, but lots just for all of us from the book of Ruth, is just simply this, that God has a perfect plan, and it will be accomplished in the end. And that's just trusting God. And that's why I say, I think There's a unique and special way that single people who are trying to figure out what God's plan for them need to trust the Lord, but we all need to trust the Lord. We all needed to be just, God has a plan, and sometimes God takes us down these wacky, long, and broken roads. But remember earlier we said hindsight's 20/20. And I know so much better now. Things that I was so upset about in the time, I'm so thankful happened, right? Breakups, lost jobs, catastrophe, all things that got me to where I am today. And so we need to just keep trusting God and be like Job. Well, like the Lord gives and he takes away. Right? Blessed be the name of the Lord. And naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. That's the heart of Job. He just knows that I'm just going to trust God in everything and in every situation. And so whatever situation you're in, trust God. He has a plan, and his plan will be